Hello and welcome to the Arise interview, where we take time to reflect on the big stories from the news and on the fortunes and affairs of the world in an hour of conversation with commentators, analysts and thought leaders. I'm Charles Anyegulu. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, 100 days into his term in office, the US President Joe Biden has delivered a speech in which he set an optimistic tone for the country under his leadership, outlining a $4 trillion spending plan and promising a once-in-a-generation investment in America itself. He said the US was rising anew, choosing hope over fear, truth over lies, and light over darkness. Among other things, he addressed infrastructure and race, jobs and families, gun control, and climate change. And in the wake of the George Floyd murder, he demanded reform of the criminal justice system. We have analysis of the president's big speech, as well as his first 100 days in office, coming up. So, a big speech from Joe Biden to the joint session of Congress, marking his first 100 days in office. The US president delivered an optimistic address calling for, among other things, economic relief for hard-hit Americans. The president addressed Russia, China, gun control and climate change, jobs and families, infrastructure and race relations. And he made a case that he's brought progress already and intends to deliver much more over the rest of his term.
I need not tell anyone this, but gun violence has become an epidemic in America. The flag at the White House was still flying at half-mast for the 8 victims of the mass shooting in Georgia, when 10 more lives were taken in a mass shooting in Colorado. And in the week in between those two events, 250 other Americans were shot dead in the streets of America. 250 shot dead. I laid out several of the Department of Justice actions that are being taken to impact on this epidemic. One of them is banning so-called ghost guns. These are homemade guns built from a kit that includes directions how to finish the firearm. The parts have no serial numbers, so they show up at crime scenes and they can't be traced. The buyers of these ghost gun kits aren't required to pass any background check. Anyone, from a criminal or terrorist, could buy this kit and within 30 minutes have a weapon that's lethal. But no more. And I'll do everything in my power to protect the American people from this epidemic of gun violence, but it's time for Congress to act as well. Talk to most responsible gun owners and hunters. They'll tell you there's no possible justification for having 100 rounds in a weapon. What do you think, deer wearing Kevlar vests? They'll tell you that there are too many people today who are able to buy a gun, but shouldn't be able to buy a gun. These kinds of reasonable reforms have overwhelming support from the American people, including many gun owners. The country supports reform, and Congress should act. This shouldn't be a red or blue issue.
President Biden there talking about gun control, among many other things that he talked about. And we have comprehensive analysis of President Biden's speech and his first 100 days in office. And my first guest in that regard is Ambassador Michael Battle, who served as the U.S. Ambassador to the African Union from 2009 to 2013, and also as U.S. Representative to the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. And he joins me now from Atlanta. Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador Battle, for joining us. And first of all, for the benefit of our international audience who may not know these things, this examination of the first 100 days of the presidency has been around for many decades now. Tell us about the significance of the event as you see it.
The significance of an analysis after the first 100 days goes to trying to view the tone of a presidency. When a president sets out to tackle some very large issues in a very short period of time, to show his intent and to show his motivation and his connectivity with the rest of the nation. President Biden was extremely extremely positive. And most of the persons who looked at the speech and heard the speech last night were able to notice a tone of positivity. That was not an attack on the previous administration. That was an effort to reach across the political aisle to say that if we're going to move forward as the United States of America, we have to do so as a united people, coming together across ideological differences, racial differences, political differences, religious differences, all kinds of differences need to be superseded by a transcendent connectivity that makes us united. Interestingly enough, that is a theme that President Obama put forward in his first speech to the Democratic National Convention years ago. So it is understandable that President Biden would try to talk about unity. And it's not a Democratic thing, because you notice that many presidents in the past, in fact, the U.S. has a history of presidents who have talked about unity and have talked about things like the gun control issue that you just mentioned. What Biden is trying to do is to move from talk and conversation to constructive action. And I am confident that we will make tremendous progress under this leadership.
Well, thank you very much indeed for setting that out, your analysis of his speech. We will return to that speech imminently and some of the things that he said, which we hope to further analyze. But as you scrutinize Mr. Biden's first 100 days and what he's done with it, what do you see?
Well, I see that he has turned the nation around on one of the major things that was affecting the nation and the world, and that is COVID-19. The number of persons who have been vaccinated, for example, he had indicated that in his first 100 days, he wanted to have 1 million persons per day receive the vaccine, which would be 100 million people. Well, we have far exceeded that 100 million. It's about 220 million persons who have received the vaccine, and every American citizen over the age of 16 is now able to get the vaccine. And I remember when I first got the vaccine some time ago, my wife and I had to drive almost 30 to 45 minutes to get the vaccine. Well, now there is a vaccine site within 5 minutes of every single household in the nation. That is progress that is remarkable. He's also looked at ways to address poverty in this nation. You know, most of the time when people think about the U.S., they don't think about poverty. But there is a lot of poverty in the nation. There's hunger in the nation. There are children who go to bed at night without having sufficient food. Well, he is addressing this in the American Families Plan. Reduction of poverty, increasing of educational opportunities, providing an opportunity for every child beginning at age 3 to go to school, not daycare, school, where there would be school from age 3 all the way up to 2 years beyond high school. So that is 14 years of education plus 2 years of pre-education, which would be 16 years of education for every American citizen. This is absolutely phenomenal. And I hope we have time, Charles, to talk about the infrastructure program, which is one of the things that interests me tremendously.
Well, now that you bring it up, Ambassador Battle, why don't we launch straight into that infrastructure, massive infrastructure program that he's proposing? I mean, although the Republicans say that a lot of it is not actually infrastructure, it just sounds like it's infrastructure.
Well, let me respond to the Republican criticism first. You know, what happened, and unfortunately, I have tremendous respect for Tim Scott, but unfortunately, Tim Scott gave a very narrow definition of infrastructure by looking at infrastructure with the exclusivity of roads and bridges. Well, infrastructure has a whole lot more to do with roads and bridges. It has to do with airways, railways. It has to do with waterways, with changing out all of the lead piping that is in some poor communities and putting in proper piping that will not provide water poisoning with the flow of water into persons' homes, making neighborhoods able to become more beautified by providing opportunities for people to own homes. All of that is infrastructure. And then beyond the physical infrastructure, President Biden is talking about an investment in human infrastructure, making life more manageable, more easy, more pleasant, more able to be a well-lived life in the context of the U.S. So all of that is infrastructure beyond the narrow definition of infrastructure that some Republicans have proposed. Now, interestingly enough, most presidents, Democrat and a Republican, for a long period of time have been talking about infrastructure. You know, there has not been a major nationwide assessment, analysis, and improvement of our highway system since Eisenhower. And then there was some improvement made during the Kennedy era, but it was an overflow from the Eisenhower era. So we have to go back and rebuild our roads, rebuild our railways, rebuild our airways. Years ago, I did an article in the Ambassador's Review, which is a publication for American diplomats. And I said in that article that Africa is seeking an infrastructure renewal, in part because Africa has been able to see the benefits of American positive infrastructure. I think when we go back and rebuild our infrastructure, we will again become the model for African infrastructure.
Okay, I'll tell you what, we'll come back and talk about Africa, because I know that's something dear to your heart. Do stay with us. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our analysis of President Biden's big speech to Congress, as well as his first 100 days in office. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Sinyakulu. Now, it was a speech to show the world that America is back and here to stay, in President Biden's own words. 100 days into his term in office, Mr. Biden has again stressed the importance of tackling climate change. He started his address by praising the success of the COVID vaccination campaign, and he welcomed the 1.3 million jobs created by his American Rescue Plan. President Biden also addressed America's strategic competitors. On Russia, he said he did not seek escalation with President Putin, but Moscow's actions would have consequences. And he paid special attention to China, saying the U.S. would not let Beijing make progress at America's expense.
The investments I proposed tonight also advance the foreign policy, in my view, that benefits the middle class. That means making sure every nation plays by the same rules in the global economy, including China. In my discussion with President Xi, I told him, we welcome the competition. We're not looking for conflict. But I made absolutely clear that we will defend America's interest across the board. America will stand up to unfair trade practices that undercut American workers and American industries, like subsidies from state to state-owned operations and enterprises, and the theft of American technology and intellectual property. I also told President Xi that we'll maintain a strong military presence in the Indo-Pacific, just as we do with NATO and Europe, not to start a conflict, but to prevent one.
President Biden and the former U.S. envoy to the African Union, Ambassador Michael Battle, is still with me from Atlanta as we continue to analyze Mr. Biden's speech and his first 100 days in office. Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador Battle, for staying with us. And before we went on break, you were talking about Africa. Of course, you were the American envoy to the African Union, which meant that you were in close communication with all the heads of state, basically, and all the 54 countries of the continent. Mr. Biden did not mention Africa in that speech to Congress, but that, of course, does not mean that Africa isn't fairly up on his agenda.
Absolutely not. You know, Secretary Blinken has already begun the process of having, at this point, virtual meetings with our embassies on the African continent. Just a few days ago, he had a virtual meeting with the embassy in Nairobi and also in Abuja, where he was talking about the kind of efforts that the U.S. will make toward the African continent. And he has consistently talked about Africa, and so has President Biden. And as you know, I co-chaired the Africa foreign policy team for the Biden-Harris candidacy. And I am very much aware of the fact that Africa is very high on President Biden's agenda. One of the things that people need to know about Biden is that he had a pro-Africa stance when he was in the Senate. He was one of the key leaders in the Senate who insisted that the U.S. took an approach toward South Africa that would end apartheid. Years ago in 2010, when I first brought the leadership of the African Union Commission to the U.S., one of the meetings that they had in the Situation Room in the White House was a 45-minute meeting with Vice President Joe Biden. So he comes to Africa from the context of being well-informed, well-intended, with the right kind of positive attitude that seeks to view Africa as a strategic partner with the U.S., not patronizing, not focusing on development, but focusing on investment, focusing on trade, focusing on ways to create a stream of income on the African continent to make Africa itself stronger. Because when Africa's capacity is enhanced, Africa's ability to take its seat appropriately on the world stage is far better positioned. So President Biden's approach to Africa will be a very positive approach. Interestingly enough, it will skip over some of the stuff that happened in the previous 4 years, and it will reconnect with what Bush, Clinton, and Obama attempted to do in a positive way on the African continent.
Well, I mean, beyond, of course, your clearly close relationship with the Biden administration today, Ambassador Battle, you were, of course, in active diplomatic service in Africa and served as U.S. ambassador to the African Union, as we mentioned earlier, and you are today considered to be a specialist in U.S. African affairs. And you were, of course, also across security developments the arrival of the U.S. Command, Africa Command, a few years ago. So perhaps you can chart for us the American reaction to the call by President Buhari of Nigeria to move the U.S. Command to Africa. How does it look?
Well, the conversation about the location of AFRICOM has been around since the origination of AFRICOM. There have been many instances when some African nations have thought AFRICOM would be better located in a particular region of the African continent as opposed to being located where it is now in Stuttgart. The reality is that AFRICOM's mission on the African continent does not require it to be 100% physically located on the continent. We do have a tremendous amount of assets in Djibouti already with CJTF-HOR, the Combined Joint Task Force on the Horn of Africa. The intent of AFRICOM is to be an organization that will assist in the training, the development of African militaries, to allow African militaries to have not only the strength to defend itself, but the strength also to be of an assistance to African nations during times of disasters, famine, and other kinds of circumstances, similar to what the U.S. military does. The U.S. military is not only engaged in war-fighting aspects, what we call the lethality of military. There are a lot of non-lethal things that militaries engage in, and that has been positive community engagement, working with floods, working with hurricanes, working with disaster relief. For example, now, in many instances, it is military people who are providing the COVID-19 vaccine, who are staffing the vaccine sites, providing the logistics for the vaccine. So AFRICOM can do that no matter where it's located, whether it's in Northern Africa, Southern Africa, Eastern, Western, Central Africa, or whether it has satellite locations in different parts of the African continent, but its physical location in Stuttgart, in the US, or wherever is less essential than what AFRICOM is designed to provide. And that is logistical support, training support, equipping support, and communications support. And of course, I know a lot of the details about that because, as you know, I advised the first two commanders of AFRICOM, and I'm prior military myself. And so I'm very comfortable with the ability of the military to do its mission, even if its physical location is distant.
Ambassador Michael Battle, I want to thank you very much indeed for your
Thank you.
sterling analysis. He was, of course, the former U.S. envoy to the African Union, and he was talking to me there from Atlanta. And you're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our analysis of President Biden's big speech to Congress, as well as his first 100 days in office. I'll be joined by the former U.S. ambassador to Nigeria, Dr. Robin Renee Sanders. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Aniekolu. Now, as he marks his 100 days in office, President Biden has told the joint session of Congress that America is on the move again. He's outlined 2 new packages to ensure it keeps moving. He said his America Jobs Plan would be a blue-collar blueprint to build America and to create millions of green jobs. And he vowed to ensure Americans were better paid. He said his American Family Plan would ensure all children get access to good child care and education and provide child tax credits. Mr. Biden said this would be paid for by reversing his predecessor's tax cuts.
American Families Plan will provide access to quality, affordable child care. We guarantee, when I'm proposing the legislation, we guarantee that low and middle income families will pay no more than 7% of their income for high quality care for children up to the age of 5. The most hard-pressed working families won't have to spend a dime. Third, the American Families Plan will finally provide up to 12 weeks of paid leave and medical leave, family medical leave. In March, we expanded tax credit for every child in a family, up to $3,000 per child if they're under 6 years of age. Over 6 years of age, and $3,600 for children over 6 years of age. With 2 parents, 2 kids, that's $7,200 in the pockets that are going to help take care of your family. And that will help more than 65 million children and help cut child care poverty in half. And we can afford it.
Joe Biden, with one of the many things he talked about. Well, for her analysis of President Biden's speech to Congress and his first 100 days in office, I'm joined now from Washington by the former U.S. career diplomat, Dr. Robin Renee Sanders, who served as U.S. ambassador to Nigeria, Republic of Congo, and the West African Regional Organization, ECOWAS. Ambassador Sanders is currently CEO of FEED's advocacy initiative, which focuses on strategies for economic and business development for Africa. Ambassador, we are exceedingly grateful to you for joining us today. And just reflect for us on the first 100 days of Mr. Biden's presidency. What do you see?
Hi, Charles. It's great to see you again. I thought the speech was quite good. I think it's very reflective of who Joe Biden is. It's the third time as a charm. He's run twice before as president, and I think that what he see in this packages, this sense of packages that he has put together, is his vision for America that he's had for a while, and now he has the opportunity, president, to put those things together and put them as the focal point of what American domestic policy is going to be and what American foreign policy is going to be. So I actually gave the speech an A, actually, a top grade, even though I know there's some challenges on migration and the policy with migrants here and immigration. But I think overall, for the first 100 days of a presidency, he has done quite well. The U.S. GDP growth rate is projected to be quite high at above 6%. We've got 70% of all Americans vaccinated, adult Americans vaccinated. I think that there's a sense that democracy is really back, and that includes in domestic policy to ensure that we are reaching the most vulnerable Americans. We talked about education and healthcare and childcare and all of these things that everyday Americans struggle with. So I think on the domestic side, despite the challenges that I mentioned, I think that he's laid out a vision for the U.S. that I think he's had for many, many years. On the foreign policy side, there's still a lot that we need to do. I think that security and engagement with China and Russia are certainly on the table. Listen to the speech, it's clear that those are competitors for us on a number of areas, but he's also willing to work with them on things where we can cooperate.
Okay, we're lost bits of what you said because I think there's a slight issue with your sound, but we got the gist of it and we could make out pretty much what you were saying. But I mean, someone said, Ambassador Sanders, that the best recipe for success in a new job is to follow an underperformer. Did coming in after Donald Trump, particularly in his mishandling of the pandemic, give an extra advantage to Joe Biden?
Well, I hate to see the pandemic term used as extra advantage because it was such a devastating thing for the world in the U.S. But I do think that the vision that the president has laid out, he's had for quite some time. The response to the pandemic is just adding to the high approval rating that he has from most Americans, particularly on COVID. It's at 66% as of last night, just on COVID. And in general, his approval rating is at 52%, about 10 points higher than his predecessor during the same period of time. So I would say that his implementation of the COVID vaccine program and how fast it's throughout the country does give him a bump. But I think that overall, the vision that he has had for America, he's had for quite some time. And it's it's big or go home. He wants to do big things, and I think he's had those big things on his agenda for quite some time.
And I mean, as you examine, Ambassador Sanders, Mr. Biden's policies on key issues such as racial equity, gun control, gun reform, immigration, has he met the expectations of Americans in your assessment?
I think that the verdict is still out on that a bit. I think the rhetoric certainly has met my expectations. and the expectations of a lot of people that are worried about these issues. The question is, can you turn those expectations into reality? The president did mention the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, the hopes of getting it passed before the 1-year anniversary of Mr. Floyd's killing on May 25th last year, 2020. And so the fact that he put that out there on the public stage last night, that this is an important bill, it really addresses some of the fundamental challenges that we are concerned about in the social justice sector, I think is important. The immigration issue, there are challenges there. There's no question about that. And I think that if they were looking at their own report card as the administration, I think that they realized that they needed to do better on the immigration issue. And you see some of those changes taking place now. The gun control, you heard him last night talking about things he'd like to see, checks, and removing this ability to have ghost guns, guns that are rated sometimes on 3D printer. There's no serial number. There's no way to track those. And so he did put those out there on the public stage, and legislation that would need to be in place in order for those things to happen and those things to change. And clearly, the question will be whether or not those things can get through the Senate. They'll likely get through the House. The question is whether or not they can get through a very, very tight Senate.
And let's talk about one area that you are obviously very interested in, which is U.S.-Africa relations. You were ambassador to a number of countries in Africa, as well as the regional organization ECOWAS in West Africa. Are you seeing President Biden standing together with Africa in his first 100 days after what some see as 4 years of disengagement by Donald Trump? I mean, is the U.S. more engaged in African affairs in the first 100 days of the Biden presidency?
I would argue, yes. I think overall we are more engaged on the foreign policy side than we have been for quite some time. But we're more engaged in the traditional sense of what we are known for. We've gone back from this transactional framework that we had over the last 4 years to really core of our principles, which is really, talking about democratic principles, talking about democracy, talking about human rights, engaging on those things. Clearly at the top of the agenda for us, though, and I would argue for most of the regions in the continent right now, is security. I mean, I do think that the U.S. has to step up a little bit more on the security front, given the range of conflicts that have really taken an uptick over the last 6 or 7 months. I think that the relationship will be one of engagement. You see that already. We issued a number of statements on all of the conflicts that are happening. We had a special envoy for the Eritrea-Ethiopia situation. You see that President Biden, as well as Secretary of State Blinken, have spoken to numerous African leaders. You had 5 African leaders that were invited to the Leaders Climate Summit. So I think that the engagement is there. So if I would put a list together, I would say democratic values, human rights, engagement across the board, and that includes trade and investment and business and all of those kinds of things. With security right now kind of being at the top of the list because it has to be at the top of the list.
And Tim Scott, who gave the Republican response to Mr. Biden's speech in Congress, making the case that the problems the U.S. has had with race are problems that are in the past. I mean, people from Donald Trump on down say that. Does having a black Republican senator make that argument, give Republicans a little more cover to be able to assert it, or do you still detect a challenge for the Republican Party to try to come up with a strategy for dealing with racial divisions in America?
I think that the racial divisions in America are real, and they have been here for quite some time, and they have reached a crescendo of the likes that I've not seen in my lifetime. I certainly know my great-grandparents and my grandparents have seen but I haven't seen it as an adult American. And so it's very, very different. Senator Scott, I respect the fact that, it's about, freedom of expression and freedom of voice. And he has that as an American, to have his views, to have his opinions. He comes from the great state of South Carolina. That's where my heritage comes from. My great grandparents and everybody in both sides of my family come from that great state. And so the fact that he's a Southern African American speaking about race in the U.S., where he's experienced himself, he can have his own personal views on that, and I don't diminish his personal views. But I don't think that meets the call that we see across the nation. We saw it all summer. We were seeing it again repeated. We had, in the last 3 or 4 weeks, another 150 people, shot by violence and gun violence, of which the majority have been Black and brown people. So I think it's I won't say it's a hollow argument, because there are going to be people that see that argument as valid. But I think overall, the manifestations that we have seen across this nation really underscore that the fact that that's not the case. And it's not going to be the case until things like the George Floyd Policing Act gets passed, and gun control gets passed, and some other things that he outlined last night.
Ambassador Sanders, I want to thank you very much indeed for taking the time to talk to us and to give us the benefit of your analysis. Dr. Robin Renee Sanders served as U.S. Ambassador to Nigeria, Republic of Congo, and the West African Regional Organization, ECOWAS. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our analysis of President Biden's speech to Congress, marking his first 100 days in office. We'll get Republican reaction. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Aniegolu. Now, as he marks his first 100 days in office, President Biden has outlined an ambitious program. It's aimed at transforming the U.S. economy and society after the pandemic, and it's worth almost $4 trillion. Mr. Biden told a joint session of Congress the initiatives would be paid for by an overhaul of the tax system that'll double capital gains tax, raise the top rate, and close loopholes. But the Republican Senator Tim Scott dismissed the proposals as a socialist dream.
No matter how we voted, this was the pitch. You just heard it again. But our nation is starving for more than empty platitudes. We need policies and progress that brings us closer together. But 3 months in, the actions of the president and his party are pulling us further and further apart. Tonight, we also heard about a so-called family plan, even more taxing, even more spending, to put Washington even more in the middle of your life, from the cradle to college. The beauty of the American dream is that families get to define it for themselves. We should be expanding opportunities and options for all families, not throwing money at certain issues because Democrats think they know best.
And that's the Republican Senator Tim Scott there giving the official response to Joe Biden's speech in Congress marking his 100 days in office. Well, to get a Republican view of Mr. Biden's proposals and analysis of his first 100 days in office, I'm joined now from Florida by the Republican strategist Erol Morkoc. Great to see you again, Erol. So Mr. Biden touting his success with the coronavirus vaccine, touting the economic growth and jobs growth that's happened in the first 100 days of his presidency. But then I suppose someone like yourself, who's a Republican strategist, will say that at least some of it is momentum from the Trump presidency carrying over into the Biden administration. Is that right so far?
Absolutely, and we're actually quite pleased to see that. We're happy that President Biden has taken Operation Warp Speed, and he has gotten out a record amount of vaccines as per the Trump agenda and the Trump plan. Keep in mind, Joe Biden goes out there and says America was on fire 100 days ago. I didn't even have a vaccine. And Dr. Fauci came out and contradicted him. Now, unlike the Democrats, we're not trying to politicize this. We're not trying to say oh, Joe Biden is doing a poor job. We're not criticizing the rollout. We're not putting it down because it's a great plan. And it's a great plan that President Trump and the Republican Party worked swiftly to help. Now, if they want to, let's say, be covetous and take credit, by all means take credit, but the American people know that certainly Joe Biden's catalyst for this vaccine has been from the Trump administration. And thankfully, the economy has not collapsed through all of this. We had a great steward in President Trump who handed off literally the greatest economy in recorded world history. I'm an economic historian. You've never seen a parallel to it that hasn't happened after a wartime. So Joe Biden's having tremendous economic success, job numbers that are coming out of the groundwork we laid. And that is sort of the presidential system. We definitely left a great country for him to hopefully, keep making great, but he seems to want to look at Bernie Sanders, AOC, and these sort of great new society ideas from the 60s and misconstrue that, and hopefully he doesn't take us in the wrong direction. Time will tell.
Well, that brings me rather nicely to the next bit of this conversation, which is, what did you make of that laundry list of programs he wants to fund, particularly his infrastructure spending and social spending?
Oof, that's a big one to pick apart. The term infrastructure, like most things in George Orwell's universe that we seem to be living in, has a little doublespeak. If you can look at, for example, Joe Biden, his entire life, he's an Irish Catholic, great man of faith, and we always respect that. And historically, he's been anti-abortion. Now he's decided that infrastructure and abortion are hand in hand. The idea that the country is based on white supremacy and every institution is racist, so infrastructure is tearing down the fabric of society, isn't the same. When you look at some of these tax plans, for example, the tax credit, you're looking at $1.4 trillion over 10 years. But the Biden administration puts out numbers saying $420 million because they're only putting out 5-year projections. And, while that's all fun and games, the way that these things, the amortization works, or reverse amortization works, is you start paying for these programs towards the back end. So they're essentially trying to bribe the American people with their own money. And when you looked at what they're talking about infrastructure, I mean, the percentage that's actually going to what traditional, normal people would consider infrastructure, perhaps a bridge, perhaps a road, perhaps improving, some of our failing, the water pipes in Flint, which is a sad state in our countries. Maybe that could be a positive part of infrastructure. It's a Democrat proposal, but I'm here as a Republican conceding, yeah, we should replace all those pipes. So there's infrastructure, and then there's social reorganization, social engineering. The Green New Deal is the first, let's say, proposal that would actually weaken the American economy, unless, of course, you do it in debt-filled equity. I'm sorry, not equity. You do it in a debt-fueled a way of quantitative easing, where you're pumping trillions and trillions of dollars into the economy. Keep in mind, this has to all be paid back, or you need to inflate your way out of debt. Since 1588, no country's actually paid off their debt directly without inflation, whether it's they lowered the quantity in silver or they lowered the value of their currency. And as you debase the currency, the working class is going to be hit with things like gas prices going up by a factor of 6. You look at lumber prices at 200%. Somebody who wanted to build a deck in 2017 for their backyard, that deck is almost 3 times the price. And you put all those things together, it's a recipe for complete society dependence on the government, which is what the Democrat Party makes their bread and butter. They don't want individuals. They don't want creation. They want people dependent. That's right. Their new tax structure that they're trying to tax the business people who they demonize, who are, the ones who are taking the risk. Okay. So that's the situation we're in.
Well, I need to get to a couple of things before we end the chat. Tim Scott, who gave the official Republican response, and who is, of course, black himself, made the statement that America is not a racist country. That's a difficult position to take, not just in the light of current events, but decades, even hundreds of years of events, isn't it? Is that something that many Republicans believe, that the problems the U.S. has had with race are problems that are in the past?
No, we don't think the problems are in the past. Quite to the contrary, we're proud of the fact that this country, 60 years after its founding in 1776, abolished slavery. I'm a historian. We look at our past to learn from it. America inherently is not a racist country. America has had racism. Racism is not something that's gone, something that's not in society. But as the gentleman who gave the rebuttal said, Senator Scott, 100 years ago they taught people the color of their skin was the most important characteristic, and if they looked a certain way, they're inferior. Today, in those same schools, they're teaching if your color of your skin defines you, and if you look a certain way, you're an oppressor. It's a way to divide the people, especially to divide the working people. And to say that America is inherently a racist nation, like the UN, our UN representative went to the UN and said, our founding documents are soaked in white supremacy, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. Well, societies progress. We go through things. And the idea that America is racist like it was in the 60s or anything, I mean, if you're a racist, you're condemned in American society. You couldn't walk the street with a racist sign at night. The KKK can only march during the day, covered by police. This is a country that categorically rejects racism, and the Republican Party is the party of Lincoln, the party that freed the slaves. So it's great to hear Senator Tom Cotton standing up for that, considering all the vitriol and hate that has gone his way. A man who overcame a lot, whose grandfather was a man who picked cotton in the South, and he understands more than anybody some of these situations. So it's great to see him out there front. He could be a candidate actually in 2024.
Yes, I've heard that mentioned. We'll have to see how things go. But I want to thank you very much indeed, Erol Morkoc, for your contributions. I wanted to get your take on that attack on the Capitol on January 6th, which Mr. Biden ended up also talking about. But sadly, we're out of time. But I hope we will have the opportunity to engage with you again very soon indeed. Erol Morkoc is a Republican strategist, and he was talking to me there from Florida. That's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja and the United States, bye-bye, and thank you for watching.